Great. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the meeting for week 3 of the Unbridled Accountability and Support Program. So that means you are already more than halfway through the course. So congratulations on that. And I couldn't be more proud of all of you for how you're digging into this content and not just going through the motions, but actually doing the experiential practices and trying to shift some things in your lives. So that's huge. And I'm really, really proud of y'all. So as we get started today, I just wanted to start and see if there's anyone who has any reflections, comments, questions, anything that you want to share to kind of kick us off. Could be about this week's, or it could be about previous weeks. Just any comments before I launch in? Okay, Carol. Yep, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay, I don't think I'll start coughing. I tried with Phoebe to. I was going to take her out of her paddock and take pictures and things like that, but she did the usual. I don't want to go, and so I went, all right, you don't want to go, and so I just stood there with her for a while, and she was already had the halter and lead rope on her, and I'm just standing there waiting. And all of a sudden, she just turns right and walks up the hill to her hay, taking me with her, of course. And that, okay, that's what you wanted.
She actually, at least she gave you an answer, right? She gave you
yeah. So I said, okay, well, we'll see. Maybe if I do that enough, she'll actually decide I'm not there to make her life miserable at this moment.
Well, if nothing else, at least it started to be a conversation, right? She said no, you changed, you said, okay, I'll try something different. Let me hold space and see what you want. And then she gave you a response. So that's some steps in the right direction, right?
Yep.
Yeah. The communication is starting to open up. Yeah. Excellent. Mary or Shayla, anything you want to share from?
I have to tell you that this morning I had an incident come up, and I was dealing with 2 negative people. And I was being asked to do things that was their responsibility. And I was not real good with handling it. Oh my God. But I do see how the pause thing you're talking about is such a good way to go about things like that. And that I think is the good part about it. But I also felt that I am so angry with things that are unresolved that I seem to not be able to pause. The natural first thing is anger. So that was a light bulb, not a very pretty one, but starting to see some stuff.
I love it. All the light bulbs are so important. And the first step in anything is always that we have to just notice what's actually happening.
Yes.
So I love that however you dealt with it this morning, you can sit back and maybe go, all right, let me think about how I might have done that just with a little more nuance or grace, right? But still not backing down, right? Still holding your, right. So the most important thing is that if you had the boundary, that's the first win. Then then how graceful we are about it is something we can continue to work on, right? Yeah. So a win that you had a boundary, an observation that maybe pauses or some other strategies might, you might feel better after the interaction, I guess would be a good way to put it, more at peace.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Shayla, anything you want to share or?
Sure. So I am a hardcore people pleaser. I don't know how to say no. And this week, or I guess last week, there was somebody that asked me to do something, and I took a very long pause. And I didn't respond until like 2 or 3 days later, and I did not say yes. And it didn't feel so bad.
All right. That sounds like big wins. Big wins. Yeah. So the power pause can be momentary. The power pause can be a couple hours. It can be days. It could be weeks if it needs to be, right? There's no length of time for a power pause. It's however long it takes for us to find our center and come back in a more grounded way for whatever we need to do. Awesome. I love those shares. All right. So we'll come back with more sharing here in a little bit. But so this week was about codependency and boundaries, right? And codependency, people pleasing is all really tied together. I really loved Carol's question in the classroom. I don't know whether you all have comments turned on, so you see those when they come through, but she was asking about whether codependency is the same as a trauma response. And that was a really excellent question. And the answer is kind of, it depends. So codependency isn't always a trauma response, but codependency very certainly can be an unhealthy or dysfunctional attachment pattern that can come out of trauma or can be born out of trauma. And it may be related to trauma more often, really, than it's been historically thought of. Codependency has kind of been around in a concept for a lot longer than I've really been hearing as much talk about trauma. So there may be, as time goes on, we may realize that it's all kind of related to trauma. Because really any time that we don't feel, people pleasing comes out of usually like us not feeling seen or heard or worthy, right? Or validated. And so that's where the people pleasing tendency comes from. And any of those experiences can be traumatic, right? There's a lot of people who don't like to use the word trauma unless it's like I said, big T trauma, like some real horrible event has happened. But there's all different kinds of trauma and levels of trauma. So, all right. But yes, codependency, regardless of sort of what the basis of it is, if we have it, and most people do, right? There are not very many humans alive today that don't have codependency, partly just because the way our society is teaches us how to be codependent, right? Even just the hierarchies of workplace scenarios. We have to be a people pleaser. We want to make our bosses happy. We want to do what the organization needs us to do. That teaches a form of codependency, right? Where we're not really thinking as much about what we want or who we are in this situation. We're trying to be who we need to be for our employer. So it doesn't just have to be family dynamics, but pretty much a lot in human society cultivates and teaches us how to be codependent. So we really have to be quite intentional and quite aware of what these patterns are and being able to identify them so that we don't get trapped in it. Like even if we're existing in it, we don't have to buy into it, if that makes sense. We can realize what we're doing. We can observe our behavior. We can say, this is why I'm doing it. I'm making an active choice to do it. And that's different than when we're behaving out of codependency and we think that that's healthy, or we think that that's normal, or we're really believing the narrative about ourselves that we're unworthy or not good enough in our own ideas. So those are different things. So it's kind of more like being conscious of the codependency, choosing when we want to participate in it, and knowing that we don't have to participate in it in a lot of situations, and we have a choice. But it is essentially the disease of lost selfhood. And I'll just repeat it again, because I think it's just worth hearing over and over again, that we become codependent when we turn our responsibility for our life and our happiness over to someone or something outside of ourselves, which can even be our own ego, right? That's an interesting thing too. If our ego is running the show, sometimes that can be almost outside of ourselves as well. Any questions about the video that I had at the beginning? This one, I have to say, was maybe a little bit harder to follow. A little self transparency here. So most of these videos, except for the very last one, were created in 2020 when I was actually recovering from long COVID. And I was not my best self in a lot of those videos. I was having a lot of foggy brain stuff, a lot of foggy headedness. So you'll see in these videos, there's a lot where like I say a couple sentences or a couple statements, and then it transitions, and then I say a couple more. that was literally because I couldn't keep my thoughts going for longer than a couple sentences at a time, often. And I was also in the process of transitioning from mostly an in-person business to doing more online things. And that was the very first retreat I did online, was a 5-week retreat on boundaries. And so I was trying to create, content to be able to do more online work. And so I almost recreated them. Like, I still have the scripts from them and everything, and the content is still quite good. I almost recreated them for this class. And then when I went back and watched them, I was so proud of myself for having gotten those done, given what I know I was going through at the time. And I was like, the content's pretty much the same. So I didn't. At some point, I'll probably redo them, but I recognize that some of them are a little choppy and hopefully not too hard to follow. But yeah, that was a challenging time for me when I created those videos. So let's see. What about the TED Talk with Salma Hindi, where she talked about her people pleasing story? Did y'all like that video? Mm-hmm. Anything that stood out from you from it? Shayla's nodding your head.
Yeah, I saved a quote, and it kind of had to do with what Mary was talking about, like responsibility. She said, when I stopped receiving emotional and spiritual validation from my parents, I started seeking it from somewhere else. And she said a couple of other things, but what got me was the end. She said, I sought an evasion for the responsibility of my decision. And I can think to a lot of times where I kind of should know an answer, but because, my thoughts have been clouded, my emotions have been clouded by just so much structured guidance that I had to make use of when I was younger. I think I forget that at my age now and like where I'm at in my life, like the decision is mine and I shouldn't have to feel like somebody else is responsible for making it. So that was just really hardcore, but good.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Anybody else have big takeaways from that? Carol?
Oh, yeah, I was became aware of codependency back in the 80s when Melanie Beattie wrote her book Codependent No More. And so I was kind of glad to see that's back in the conversation because it kind of disappeared for a while. But the people pleasing part, and I know she the comedian, I'm blanking on her name, she said something that we're all people pleasers because I still tend not to think like her. I think it's the same thing she had. I don't tend to think of myself as a people pleaser because I say no. And sometimes I've gotten in trouble for it. Even at work, there was a time at work where I would say no, and it was not until I was pushed to a certain limit, and then I had to stand up for myself and say, just because I can do 125 samples, analyze 125 samples in a morning doesn't mean I can do 200 or 250 or whatever. And that got me a lot of flack. Anyway, crazy stuff.
But I think that's an important point you brought in, that like we can't, just because we say no sometimes to some things,
yeah,
doesn't mean we're not a people pleaser, right?
yep. And
Right.
and that's where I guess I have a hard time seeing that in me. The codependent part I could easily see, but the reason why I asked about trauma is because until I learned about the trauma, little t traumas, and that my whole life I've had little t traumas that make me what I am today. And in general, talk therapy does not work for that because you're just re-traumatizing yourself. And it kind of explained why after 40 years of trying all different kinds of talk therapy, I still was in the same cycle that I had been when I was 20 something. So, and I went, oh, so yeah. And when I first heard about codependency, I would say, yeah, I'm doing things so that others will like me or acknowledge me, but I never got the acknowledgments. so, so I was always trying to fix myself so that I would behave or say or whatever that I needed to do in order to get that acknowledgement. And of course, never getting it, over and over and over again. and being kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And while I had a question, but I just could not. I have brain fog too ever since chemo. I call it chemo brain whenever I go and get into this. I can't think, and that was me yesterday. I was like, I can't think.
Mm.
But I wanted to just bring up the point. I listened to the conversation with the women in the previous boundaries are flexible, that one.
Yes.
And something they said that kind of made me go, are our experiences really that different? Because they talked about being Southern, and that being Southern made them more like people pleasers. And on one hand, I can see that because I can usually tell the difference between me and somebody who's from the South. But I have all the same issues with the male privilege and white
Mm.
male privilege and all that stuff, which I think that's under misogyny. And so I was just curious as to, are we really that different? And if we are, what causes that? I mean, I know it's a whole different culture.
It's a great
That,
question though. And but I
yeah,
don't really think that we're that different. I think there
yeah,
may
I didn't either. Yeah,
in like people in the South sometimes are really good at making it all sound really nice,
I can
right?
tell.
Not showing that we're hurt.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
I sense that is a from, and I guess that's from way, way back. I could always sense when someone was trying to, pull one over on me, and I call that the, oh, what is it? Like there's a certain smile that you look at, and you kind of like,
that's not a sincere smile, right? We're just,
it's not very sincere, yeah.
yeah.
And so I did have a sort of bias in a way against that kind of Southern hospitality. I was like, yeah, smile on your face, stab you in the back, or the what is it? Bless your heart. I could see right through that one.
Or just smiling and saying everything's, beautiful, but then not really being like, not feeling that. That's not how you feel on the inside. It's an act
Right,
that,
right.
right?
Yeah,
So I
so
think there's
that's
maybe,
why my detector is really good at that, and that's why when I talk about my in-laws doing that, it's like, yeah, they they would get that little smirk on their face, and I'd be like, anyway, okay, I've said enough.
no, that's good. Yes. And I feel like there was something else I wanted to respond to what you said, but now I've lost it. So it'll probably come back to me. But thank you. Yeah. All right. Let's see. So a couple things that I wrote down. One of the things that Salma said was that liberation is not free. It does have a cost, right? So that was, yeah, right. We sometimes have to take a little heat from it, or there are consequences for it. And also just the reminder she had that people pleasing is always motivated by fear. Right. Oh, I know one of the things going back to like, we can say no, but still be people pleasers. So people pleasing isn't really about whether you can say no or not. People pleasing is when you say yes, when you want to say no. Right. So you still sometimes are able to say no when you mean it. But if there are a lot of times when you say yes, when you really want to be saying no, that's when you're getting into the people pleasing. Okay. Then there was the self-assessment, and I don't really talk about those a lot on this because there's really nothing, those are purely for you. And my main thing is that you do not judge yourself on anything based on your responses there. It's not about trying to say yes to all the things or no to all the things or get high scores, if that's how you look at it. The sole purpose is just to be honest with yourself and become more clear and aware of your own patterns. And will some of your responses to the questions change over time? Some of the questions, hopefully, yes. Things like, I say yes when I really want to say no. Hopefully, with practice, you do less of that over time, and you may be that your responses to that might change. There are some others that may not change for some of us. Things like, I worry about hurting others' feelings. That may be a pattern that sticks with me for the rest of my life, but I'll get better at taking the power pause, doing something to break up the self-talk in my head, right? And saying, it doesn't matter if I hurt their feelings or not, I needed to say that. Or if I really feel like I could have said it better, like Mary talked about this morning, I might go back and say, how might I have said that better? Or do I need to apologize for how I said it? Not apologize for saying it, but do I need to apologize for how I said it? That kind of thing. But we may still have those worries or those concerns. And that might not ever totally go away for us. So the goal isn't to be able to say, no, I never do that, right? It's just understanding our own patterns. Okay. So the power pause and negative self-talk, you guys gave a little bit of examples. I want to talk a little bit more about that and have you share anything else from this week or other times. But I also wanted to share from Shannon because she sent some beautiful feedback and reflections on this since she knew she couldn't be here. And she told me that I could share it with all of you. So I'm going to do that. She said, I'm going to read it here for you. She said, I found the experiential practice sheet especially helpful. I have struggled with negative self-talk for my whole life and did not realize that this is part of a boundary practice. I wish I had known the tools for breaking the negative self-talk pattern in my youth, but I will certainly employ them now as I still struggle with that. She said, I had an intense experience with negative self-talk after I had participated in a workshop with at Linda Kohanov's farm, working on connection-based therapy. I had an interaction with the horses that highlighted for me, she said for her unworthiness. Then she said in parentheses, interestingly, others saw the horses holding space for me. So it was very interesting to note how different my personal experience was to what others observed was happening. But she said, I couldn't stop crying for days, and it took me about a week before I could really quell the negative self-talk that was occurring. Just remembering and or talking about that experience still brings up some strong emotions for me, including tears. I'm still trying to figure out what the root of that feeling of unworthiness is. I feel it physically most strongly in my throat, so I suspect it has to do with struggling to speak my truth, amongst other things. Perhaps, I'm assuming she means maybe when she was young or at some previous time in her life, she was shown or told that her words, thoughts were not valuable or not wanted. And she said, I will do more work and reflection on this, of course, but your tools to recenter and ground myself are very helpful as I go through this process. I find the finger rubbing and toe wiggling especially useful. Breath work helps, and I've used that in the past, but the toe wiggling in particular brings me back to the present. If you want to share this with the group, you may, if it feels relevant or helpful. So, did y'all appreciate having that story?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Does it bring us?
I
Go ahead, Mary.
sort of wanted to share that things have popped up this week that have just kind of fit into the pattern as I have kind of discovered and feel things. I saw a quote saying something about, now my mind is gone blank. God.
It happens to all of us.
Dang. You have to come back. It's gone.
I'll come back. I'll come back. Yeah. Or you just raise your hand if
Okay.
if the quote comes back to you.
Okay. Oh.
Right. Anybody else want to go talk about anything this week or even anything that was brought up by Shannon's story?
Okay.
All right. Let's go with Mary while she remembers it. Okay.
Just the anxiety thing from childhood. I never had a self because I never thought that I was valid enough to even be listened to. I blocked it all out and really was numb to being a self. My whole thing was anxiety and just living in it. And I knew I had it, but I just thought that was the way I was put together. And so I was doing something, I had to do something, and it was causing a lot of anxiety. I realized that it was doing that. And as soon as I finished, I felt the relief that it was over. And then I thought, well, I can be this. I can be over it. I can stop the anxiety. I mean, sounds so stupid and elementary, but it's like I'm finished it and I can put it away instead of continuing to live in this uptight craziness. And it was like another light came on. And another thing that happened was realizing that I wanted somebody to rescue me from all this horror. And the rescue can be in drinking alcohol and traveling and not paying attention to really how I'm feeling and looking to another person to fix me. Well, that doesn't happen. I have to fix me. And so it was so sad to realize that I'm looking to somebody else, to fix me, to take care of me. And I'm just like, I've never had that. So I just kept looking for it. And anyway, it's been a huge week for me as far as stuff coming together. And then today I blew the whole thing by being an asshole to the people I was dealing with. So we have ways to go, but little tiny lights coming.
It's so funny. You're like, I don't think I've ever experienced you being an asshole, so it's really like funny to me to think about it. But I know we all can be at times.
It's when you push the final button, that's when it comes.
Oh yeah, we all have that breaking point, right? Or that that point where we just shift over into this, like, yeah, we all have it.
So now I have people running as far as they can get from me because the bombs are going off. Oh Lord.
Well, if they're not people that you really want near you, it's perfectly okay.
Yes,
Right?
it is. Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the only time you have to feel bad about that is if it's someone who you want to have close to you and you've now made them afraid to, and you need to fix that part of it. But otherwise, it's okay. Because you know what?
Yeah.
They're going to get on with their day and probably not going to think about it.
Exactly.
Right? They're not going
Yes.
to sit and have the anxiety over it that we do. So, yeah. So anxiety is a really interesting thing, right? And breaking those patterns is really, really absolutely critical. And you realizing that, a couple things I think you realized. One was that when you took action, like did the
Yes.
thing, right? A lot of times we procrastinate because we're anxious about the thing and we put it off and we put it off, and then we're just like prolonging the anxiety about it. Then if we just do it, then we can close the chapter and move on, right? Or if we can't actually resolve it, another thing that I did learn this in therapy and it was helpful for me was like, what is there anything, asking myself the question, is there anything I can do? So, okay, say I have a big speech tomorrow and I'm super anxious about it, right? Is there anything I can do right now, an action I can take in the moment that will help me feel better? Maybe I could read over my speech again, right? Maybe, I don't know, whatever it is. If there's something, maybe I could finish the speech if I haven't finished it. Maybe I could go visit the room and get a look at it so that I know what I'm going to be walking into, right? If I'm staying at the hotel and I want to go take a look, like what action could I do right now that might help resolve some of the anxiety I'm feeling? If there's an action, do it. Like Mary said, just do the action. And if there isn't an action, then to be able to say, give yourself, there isn't anything I can do right now, right? And so having anxiety about it doesn't help, and then try to figure out another strategy. But that taking action in whatever way we can, even if it's not like making the big speech go away tomorrow, but if there is something I can do other than just sitting here being anxious, then let me go ahead and do that thing. And a lot of times any kind of action can be helpful. That's a productive action. Yeah. All right. Carol, so you were going to say something. Yeah.
Let's say I everything that's said here is like, yes, me too. Me too. The unworthiness, and I think one of the things that I commented on was essentially that my whole life I was looking for somebody to take care of me, and I didn't even realize it until a lot later in life that well, a lot of my fear and anxiety comes from, oh my God, if this happens, how am I going to survive? Who's going to take care of me? What am I going to do? You know, oh my God, am I going to kind of thing. And yet I was always a very independent person. And so that was always kind of a, what's that about? Since I, went to college so that I wouldn't have to depend on anybody else. And I had a good job, and I had, with benefits, they took care of me all through my disability for like 20 something years. Uh, anyway, and yet, I still would feel threatened or whatever, or unsafe, or if I'm dating somebody and I'm feeling like they're gonna dump me, or if I say this, they're gonna dump me, or if I do something and they don't like it, they're gonna, all that, and I guess recently, and I don't remember if it was here or in another course I'm taking, I was gaslit my whole life.
Mhm.
And I fought against it tooth and nail. As I was saying, I was always trying to get people to acknowledge, oh, you really do know what's going on, but they'd always deny it. They'd always say, you're crazy. That's not the way it is. That's not what it means. That's not the. And in that reality, it was. So, and I didn't see that as gaslighting until recently. I went, okay, that was gaslighting. I thought it was cognitive dissonance. But anyway,
Yeah.
and I know that, just being a woman, and my mother, I grew up in the 60s where there was a lot of, I thought, good stuff going on. I now hear people talk about it like, oh, those were really bad times. I was like, what? No, we had the all these movements going on, women's movements and civil rights movements and anti-war movements, and that was great stuff. Uh, Unfortunately, it didn't last, but um, anyway, yeah. Now I'm gonna blank on what I was gonna say.
Well, I think it was just related to the unworthiness, right? I think that's
Yeah, and so my whole life, somewhere along the line, I realized that all I'm trying to do is get somebody to admit I'm not crazy, or I'm not stupid, or I have a point, or, or that kind of thing. And of course, never finding that, and then getting into I need to fix myself, and people are going to leave me, which a lot of it came from my mother and my brother, because the two of them were the gaslighters in my life.
yeah,
Uh,
it's a hard thing to
yeah.
recover from, right? And it can
Yep.
make us feel crazy.
Yep.
Sure.
And yet I knew I wasn't, so I was always fighting it. It was just, and I guess that's why the people pleaser thing I have to think about. But the thing about liberation, that's when I thought, oh, yeah, that makes sense, but it's still not clear in my head what I'm doing that's people pleasing, except that at the deepest level, it was to get so that people don't reject me, abandon me,
Mhm.
um, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is like a big survival fear.
Yep. And as you said, that fear can be actually kind of irrational because you've always been able to take care of yourself. And
Yeah.
honestly, a lot of the people who have the biggest fears about that are quite capable,
Mm-hmm.
independent, successful, right? People that just have that fear because so what happens is, like I mentioned this book about adult children of emotionally immature parents, which is
Oh, I think I have that.
fascinating little book, honestly, if you
Yes,
haven't
I
read it.
think I have that.
Yeah, you might want to review it again. But it's really that, like, it doesn't even have to be malicious in any way, right? But
Mhm.
if parents' storyline, if they haven't done their work, which for a lot of people don't, right? The majority of people don't do their work. And so it's not uncommon for us to have parents that didn't do the work to heal their own wounds, right? And like in my family, it wasn't even that nobody was really mean. They didn't say mean things in my family. I have some of the nicest people in my family. but there were a lot of things we didn't talk about. There were a lot of lies or faking things, right? And then a lot of times it was what wasn't said,
Mhm.
right? It's what doesn't get said, what doesn't get acknowledged, the questions that don't get asked, the questions that never get asked about who you are, or what you're thinking, or how you feel, or what you like, right? And so sometimes if you're a sensitive child, just never even getting asked that is automatically showing that they don't care, right? Or you're not, or your internal talk is that I must not be interesting enough or worthy enough, or why doesn't anybody care? I must not be lovable, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be this volatile, mean environment. It can be, but it can just be kind of a neglectful environment. And one of the things that book talks about, and I may end up putting some of this stuff into the course too at some point, but is that if you're emotionally unsafe, a parent who feels emotionally unsafe, right? Then the independence of your child, or the free thoughts, or disagreeing opinions, or a different outlook on things that your child has, that's going to trigger in the adult this fear that my child's not going to love me, or I'm going to lose my child, or they're going to abandon me, because they think, and it's immature to think that people have to think like you do and agree with you, right, in order to be safe with them. So a lot of times it's that's being triggered in the parent, is a fear of abandonment or being found out. Maybe they have imposter syndrome about being good parents, right? So it's very threatening when they have a child who has different thoughts and ideas, different way of seeing things, different outlook on life, can be very, very threatening. And so they'll shut that down in hopes that they can still feel in control, or this illusion that whatever they think good parenting, being a good parent, is for them, right? Yeah. So even my parents to this day, when they all want to know three things: am I okay financially, am I okay physically, and am I okay emotionally? They want the answer to be yes to all those things, because then they've succeeded as a parent, right? And they don't have to worry about me. I'm an independent person. If any of those things are wrong, they immediately want to fix it, or tell me what to do to fix it, right? It's almost impossible for my family members, and it is hard for me too, because I learned this. It's very hard for them to be okay with my sister or I not being okay, or being in emotional struggle, or any kind of turmoil or challenge, knowing, full well we can get ourselves out of it, we can figure it out, but they don't like the discomfort of knowing that we are not okay. And I think it's because as parents, they feel responsible for that, or reflection on that. So it's an inability to separate themselves from our experiences, which isn't helpful, right? Like, we need to be able to figure things out for ourselves sometimes, or to just listen when we're having a hard time. So there's all different levels of this, and all of them can lead to, so as a people pleaser, I'll just want to, like, not tell my parents that there's things going on, right? Because I know it's going to be very triggering for them, and they are not going to be able to hold space for that. And then I'm going to get the repeated calls, or the 10 emails or whatever about what I should be doing. So anyway, lots of different ways that these patterns play out, and no two families are exactly alike, right? And ultimately, it's not even that important that you figure out what happened, like, or what it was that caused it. It's really just most important that you identify the patterns in yourself, and you work on shifting them, right? Because there could be lots of little things that happened that have created them. Shayla, do you have anything else you want to reflect on or add here?
Nothing in particular. There's just a lot of overlap with what everyone shared, including Shannon. So it's cool to be in a space where we're not all so different.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Okay. So let's go on to, I think we talked enough about the power pause and breaking negative self-talk, but those are really, really, this probably one of the most key things, right? Is taking that power pause. Even just, Carol, you took it with your horse, right? You got the no, you're like, okay, not quite sure what to do here, so I'm just going to take a power pause, right? And wait for her to say something. So there's even that kind of power pause. And then disrupting, whether it's breathing, rubbing your fingers together, noticing sounds. You can use sensory exercises to say, can I name 3 things I can hear right now? anything that just like kind of disrupts the anxiety and negative self-talk pattern and brings you back to the present moment. So let's move on to the horse behavior video discussion. So we had 2 videos this time. And one of the things that I wanted to ask is whether you think wild animals do, it's not, wouldn't be called people pleasing because they're not people, but anyway, do wild animals people please amongst themselves? Do you think, take the humans out of it? Do you think animals are motivated as much or at all in wanting to make the other happy? Or thinking that they can only be happy if someone else is happy? Not so much, right? Hard to think of examples that are clearly that. I'm not going to say that it never happens, but it certainly isn't, I don't think, as rampant as it is in the human environment. What's interesting is I can think of more examples, or at least I think I can, where an animal might have been trying to people please a person. You got one, Carol?
Yeah. When I hear this, I think of appeasement. So like horses in school situations or therapy situations, where they're being more used as a tool instead of as a sentient being that has choices and wants and dislikes and likes. And then they get to a point where it's like, it's not worth fighting anymore. I'm just going to shut down. And fawning or appeasing. And I guess that's what I would think if there's anything equivalent in the animal world, it would be that appeasement.
Yeah.
So stop beating on me. And if I have to do this to not have you beat on me, then I guess I will. But in the meantime, I'm shut down. I'm not paying attention. My eyes are glazed over, that kind of thing.
Yep. So in that situation, one of the things that I think almost has to be in place for people pleasing or appeasement or fawning or any of that to kind of become a pattern is there has to be a power dynamic, right? And there is at least in the human world with the parent-child relationship, the way that kids are raised in the human society, human culture today, parents are the bosses, right? Or you go to school and they're the bosses, but it comes from needing, either physically needing or having no way out, or it's a coping strategy to have to please or appease whoever has some power over us in the situation, whether it's emotional, physical, any other kind of power. And we don't see that a lot in the animal kingdom. Even among parents and animals, baby animals tend to have a lot more independence, or the parents want them to become independent. There's not so much of the codependency and emotional immaturity among the parents. They're more independent and emotionally mature and realize that the goal is that the children get independent and survive on their own as quick as possible. So it's a very different kind of environment. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about that this is largely a human condition, but I don't think that it's like a innate human condition. I think it's a learned and systemic human condition. So when Shiloh still, now he has much less of it than the other horses who know they do certain behaviors, they'll get a treat or reward or whatever. Shiloh doesn't have much of that at all, even after a year here. If he isn't comfortable with the situation, he doesn't want the food. Right? He sort of sees through that whole thing of like, oh, that's a way to you to have power over me and to get me to do something I'm not comfortable doing. Because he's a healthy adult coming at the situation from understanding what independence is. And the other horses who were raised domestically and probably hand-fed from youngsters, right? They understand there's a power dynamic there. And oh, if I do this, then I get something I want. That they believe, I don't know if they believe they need it or not, but it doesn't really occur to them to not try to earn it. Whereas Shiloh can walk away from it. And in any situation, you can be feeding him, you do something that makes him uncomfortable, he's going to bolt away, right? He's just much more like, I got to take care of me first. which is a rather a very healthy way to be. It's just not always it's not always smiled upon in human society, but it is healthy. And then let's see. I loved Carol's questions too about that Shiloh, like Mary has watched him like along the way and knows he's made a lot of progress, right? But also Carol coming in and seeing, she could immediately see he's kind of having a trauma response, right? Even while you're touching him, he's kind of frozen. He's not really giving me a lot of feedback about whether he likes it or not. He looks tense. Wasn't as tense as he used to be, right? So there's this relative thing. And it's also interesting when we deal with trauma, things get a lot more complicated, right? Because, well, I could just say, I don't ever want to make you uncomfortable, right? And then we just never have a relationship, because in his mind, relationships with people aren't safe. That has been his experience, right? He's had a lot of trauma with humans. My hope is that I can, at least in some situations, help him not feel that way, because it's very limiting for him in the world he lives in now. I wish he still lived in the wild. He doesn't, he can't. He's going to live quite a long time in this world. So I don't want him to live in constant fear and constant anxiety about that. And there are some things that I could maybe help him with that, like right now he's got some, he gets, in the summertime, he doesn't really have sweet itch, but his internal parts of his ears, he rubs them so much for whatever reason that they get bloody. I'd love to be able to put some bug medication repellent on that. But, until he's okay with me touching his ears, I'm not going to be able to do that. Right. We're getting closer. But I also know with him, if I force it, once, I'm never going to let me do it again. Right. Because he's already at that place. It would just be like, see, I knew that's what you were going to do. Right. I knew you were going to grab my ear or try to do this thing to me that I don't understand. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm trying to walk that line of being respectful and asking the questions and letting him be a choice to be engaging in the conversation. But I have to kind of make him uncomfortable sometimes. And the freeze is interesting, right? So this I wanted to share too, that I had some experiences early on, or I've had quite a few experiences where there have been participants here at my farm who have had some kind of a trauma response while they were here. I didn't always know it was happening because you can't always see it on the outside, right? Sometimes it's happening on the inside. And my different horses have different ways of dealing with it, but most of them do involve actually touching the person or waking them up in some way, bringing them back into their body in some way. Shoki was beautiful. He could do it. He would just come up to someone and he would just gently touch you, where it just brought you back. And he was so sweet that then you'd be like, oh my gosh, he's so like, right. It would bring the person back. And he'd do that however many times he needed to. He'd just stand there and he'd touch the person. That was a really sweet, beautiful way. He held space and would just be like, oh, there you go again. Let me bring you back. Let me bring you back. Whereas Tempo and Puck, Tempo is more likely to kind of actually nudge you or push you or even like smack you with her tail, right? Something that's like, wake up. It's a little bit more in your face. And Puck has even been known to come up to someone and actually tip their chair over with them in it. Kind of like, it's just interesting, right? And then, later, if I ask the person what was going on with them right then, they might be like, yeah, I kind of needed that. Thank you. So it's really, really interesting that the horses don't necessarily ignore someone who's in that state either, right? They realize that that's not a good state to be in. You're not present, you're not aware, you're actually a liability to yourself and to the world right now, to the herd. So we want to try to bring you back. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to do it, except that if how you try to do it creates a bigger rift in the relationship, then we might need to try a different way. So yeah, part of what I was doing with Shiloh. Oh, yeah, Mary.
I wanted to ask if what Marcus did to bring me to my reality was that.
Well, it's interesting. So what would you say your emotional state was when he did it?
Wow. I don't know, to come to think of it. I know it's definitely a wake-up call for me that I needed.
Yeah.
I'm
I think,
totally unaware on my part.
yeah, I think you were kind of on autopilot at that
Yeah,
moment, right? So
yeah,
she was standing at the fence and kind of, I think you even might have been petting Marcus or standing with him.
yeah,
You're kind of talk. You weren't really present with him for sure. I don't know how present you really were in your body or anything, but
yeah.
and you can tell him what he did.
Well, I was just like people pleasing Marcus or trying to actually. It's like, oh, Marcus, I think you're so wonderful. Please like me. And
Please,
he
like,
was he was backing away. I mean, he just didn't engage with me at all. And I guess my feelings were sort of hurt, like, oh, I just think you're so cool. And all of a sudden he just put his head down and bit me. And I was like, holy shit, I can't believe this. And I was so blown away, because I wasn't doing anything to make him respond that way, in my opinion, but he was picking my vibe.
you were hurt at first, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
why did he
feelings
do
were
that? Yeah.
my feelings were hurt, and so it was my beginning of my, hey, what the hell am I doing? You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
amazing.
And like you said, you were saying, you just wanted him to like you,
Yes.
but you weren't really asking him any questions about who he was or what he liked, right?
No, I hadn't even thought of that,
And you thought of that. So it was a very one-sided relationship, right? And that's a lot of times how even like our emotionally immature parents are. Like mine, they just want everything to be fine, right? Just act like everything's fine. Act like you like me, act like we're all good. And if we're operating in that state, then it's all just kind of this game we play, right?
Mm.
Marcus was like, nope, we're going to be real. We're going to be real. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. But no, he definitely wasn't people pleasing in that moment, was he?
No, I loved it after I figured it out.
Yeah. But that was huge on your part to go from being really hurt to be able to step aside and be curious, become curious about what was really going on there.
Right.
Yeah. That takes a mature person to not
Well,
the horse for being bad.
just digging in.
Yeah. That was the
Mm.
beginning for you.
Yes, it was.
The beginning. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's hard. It's hard with a horse to, it's easy for us to, even our parents, to blame it on them. And it is a lot of times they have stuff, right? But we're not owning our part of the patterns,
Yeah.
yeah, that need to shift if we're going to change it. As long as
I
we keep,
also want. I also wanted to say that the different horses have such different personalities, and Shallow is completely unique, and I admire him so much that he sticks to himself. I mean, he knows what he's going to do and what he isn't.
yep,
Rayleigh, on the other hand, is such a gem. He is happy boy in spite of all his crap. It's like, man, I got it made now. I'm loving life. I mean, he is a bomb, but they're all four so different. It's just such a great thing to watch
they
and
are,
learn.
they are really, really different. Yeah. But really has a lot going on in his body. And over time, that's getting a little harder and harder for him to manage. But he is amazingly just sweet and good natured despite, his struggles. Yeah. And I think I don't know yet. That's an interesting question of whether he has gotten to a point in his maturity level that he's kind of like waking other people up. I think he's still in the process of figuring himself out and how he
Right.
feels. But he's come a long way in that, in figuring out how he feels,
Oh yeah.
being able to say either way. Hmm.
I want to be Rayleigh.
Pretty cool. Yeah. He's easy to love for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else about the videos that you noticed or wanted to say? It's hard other than in a video with a person to even talk about the people pleasing, potential people pleasing with horses, because they just don't do it with each other. They're just not looking for that. They don't believe their happiness is dependent on anybody else's approval of them or anything like that. Yeah. All right. So this week we'll be moving into module 4, which is another big one. And it's about vulnerability and boundaries. So vulnerability is always a double-edged sword, right? And a lot of times we think about boundaries, at least early on, as a way to protect ourselves from having to feel vulnerable, right? We don't want to feel vulnerable, so we're going to put the boundaries up to make sure we never have to feel vulnerable. But that's, if you listen to Brene Brown at all, she talks a lot about vulnerability. You realize that in the end, like if that's our only strategy for not feeling vulnerable, then we are doing ourselves a disservice, because we're basically cutting ourselves off from the possibility of intimacy, of having those feelings of connection that we want, because vulnerability is the currency of intimacy. The key is learning to know when we're safe to be vulnerable and to what degree, and when we're not. And it's a huge responsibility, but also it's empowering and can feel overwhelming to know that we are the only ones that can make those decisions. We have to be the deciding factor in that. Nobody else can tell us if somebody else is safe for us, right? Only we can do that. So we have to have this relationship with ourselves and this ability to trust ourselves. But if we think about boundaries as providing, so not just like these big wall boundaries, but that the knowing in our heart that like I can put up a boundary at any point, like knowing that, being like I can start in on this, and then I can decide this doesn't feel safe anymore, and I can stop. Right? I don't have to go any further. I can cut it off, or I have the power to negotiate, the ability to negotiate this situation, and I always have the power to change the dynamic at any time that I start to feel unsafe. That's the key. So it's not like big boundary. We're getting into those nuanced boundaries of like, okay, I'm open to the relationship. Now I got to figure out what boundaries to have as I navigate my way through it, and knowing that those can change or evolve, different situations, different times, whatever. But just that inner knowing that we can trust ourselves, and that but again, we have to have the practice to know we're going to use our voice. We're going to make the decision when we start to feel unsafe. We're going to do something. We're either going to leave, going to stop the conversation. We're going to say, you know what? I don't think I really want to talk about this right now, whatever, right? That we are going to do something and be an advocate for ourselves. So that's the part that can be scary, is not being sure that we know how to do that or we can. But it's interesting that what we want to be able to do, which is create a safe space for ourselves to lean into the experience of being vulnerable with others. And if we think about our relationship with horses, we're actually trying to do that for them. Like what we want more than anything is for our horses to feel safe enough to be vulnerable with us. I want Shiloh to let me touch his ears. That's really vulnerable for him, right? But I think I can create the space that he feels vulnerable, that he can feel safe being vulnerable. I can certainly create a situation where he doesn't feel safe, but only he can decide when he's going to feel safe for me to do that, unless I force it, unless I desensitize him or do something like that, which I don't want to do, because I'm not into I'm into like not perpetuating trauma now in my relationships with my horses. So I can only be as safe as I know how to be and hope that he'll come to that place where he decides he does feel safe. So some of you have heard me say, as someone who's been in a kind of abusive relationship before, when I got into the relationship I'm in now, I needed to know that I could say no as many times as I needed to, however often I needed to, whatever way I needed to, right? I needed to know. Anytime I wanted to say no, I can say no. And it's an okay. Before I felt comfortable saying yes. Before I felt safe saying yes. So I think that's how Shiloh's going to be. He needs to know. He can say no as many times. And as long as so that he knows eventually if I get to here and he says no, I'll stop. If I get to here, or then I go up here and then it's a no, right? So he needs to know that we can have these micro conversations and that I am responsive to his no. So that's kind of the game that, not the game, but the strategy of that you'll need to have those little micro conversations about boundaries with someone, where if at any point you start to say, I think I'm done sharing, and you back off, that they're like, awesome, thank you for sharing what you did. Like, no problem. Like, I don't need to know more, right? That's a safe environment. That's someone who's safe for you to be vulnerable with, that anytime you feel like you need to back off or say no or end or stop or take a break, that they're okay with that, because that means they care more about you and the relationship than they do about whatever it is, right, that's happening, or you becoming who they need you to be. They're more concerned with how your experience is, but we have the responsibility to tell someone how we're feeling, right? If we don't tell someone, but we expect them to just know you should be backing off, can't you tell I'm uncomfortable? No, we can't always tell someone's uncomfortable, right? Or we don't know why, or we don't know what's happening. It's very hard for me to have these conversations with Shiloh when he can't tell me how he's feeling. I have to be able to trust that his body language is true, or what he's telling me is true, right? So if we're good at covering things and we're good at people pleasing, oftentimes our face is not showing how we really feel. So unless we tell someone, they may not know that we're not comfortable. All that making sense? So that's really what this module is about. And it's that's some pretty deep stuff. Let me see what else I put here. Oh, the other thing we're going to do in this is circle back to the concept of containment boundaries again. A little bit different. So there is the containment boundaries. It's the same thing, but it's kind of different. There's the containment boundaries that keep me from just being like an asshole to you, right? I'm feeling all discombobulated inside. I'm going to try to contain that so I don't put all that on you to have to deal with on somebody else. But there's also the containment boundaries of like containing our vulnerability, right? It's not only bad stuff that I don't want to put on you, but it's like, maybe this isn't a safe place for me to share how I'm feeling about this or my opinion about that. Even sometimes our opinion about politics, there's sometimes it's not safe to share that, right? So we have to make those decisions. So it's containment boundaries, almost like putting a, like I just right now I'm thinking about Ray Lucario's name, which is like Ray Lucario means like a precious, something precious inside a locket, which he is, right? He's so precious inside a locket. But it's that idea of our vulnerability should be something precious inside a locket, right? And we get to decide when and how much we open that, how much of it we let out, right? How much we let someone else in. So containing that when it's not safe to let it out or let it show. All right. And then there's going to be 2 horse behavior videos again this week. And these are kind of fun because they show vulnerability and intimacy between 2 horses. So one of them is my mother-daughter mare pair, Tempo and Puck, mutual grooming. And I love it. It's just a fun video. And you can really see how much trust is in intimacy is there between this mother-daughter, right? And mother-daughter is usually in the horse community anyway, not necessarily human, but in the horse community, typically don't have a lot of physical boundaries because the baby nursed on the mom's body, right? And the way that horse moms approach that, very different than human moms. We put babies on schedules, and the human mom decides when baby gets to eat, right? And on what schedules baby may ask, but it's up to mom to decide whether they will or not. Horse moms, for the most part, at least early on, are kind of like an open milk bar. And it's the baby's responsibility to come and nurse whenever it needs to. And mom doesn't really say no very often. Now, later, when the baby gets older and maybe, being obnoxious, mom might say no at that point. But early on, mom is safety and nutrition, and it's up to the baby, which is pretty cool, right? Baby gets to decide when and how much it wants to eat and when it needs to. Isn't even get told that. Again, very different than in the human world. And human babies obviously don't have the physical ability to be able to feed without mom's permission. So there's a lot of differences there. But so mothers and daughters and horses have a lot of body intimacy typically anyway. But you'll watch them communicate with their mouths. Like, so when horses are mutual grooming, what they will do is what this one does. So they'll have their heads crossed usually. And what this one is doing with its mouth, how it's using its mouth, and where on the body it is communicating to this one. And when they're really in sync, they'll do almost the same thing. Like they're both saying, yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. And then one will go over here. That's perfect. The other one will go, well, oh, maybe, right? And this subtle conversation. They're totally communicating with each other about how that feels. One might say, how about if I'll bite you a little harder? And she might be telling, like, this one's biting harder, might be saying, I want you to bite harder. Right? How else are they going to say? A little firmer there. And then that one might be like, no, I don't want to do that. So it's really fun to like really watch what their mouths are doing and where are they mirroring each other and how. And you'll see that it is like a conversation. So that video is fun because there's a lot of intimacy between them. They're really honest with each other, but they're also pretty in sync. So it's fun. And then the second one you're going to watch is another one of Shiloh and Rayleigh with the stick game, but this time a much smaller stick. And this video was actually filmed well before the big stick one that you saw before. So they're more confident with the small stick, but they're still at that stage, they're still getting to know each other and getting to like who's comfortable with what and how. So it's also a sweet interaction, but they're trying to figure out how to be on the same page. They're not as on the same page as Puck and Tempo are with the mutual grooming. They have moments of being on the same page, but watching them have that conversation. And you'll see several times in it where Rayleigh actually gets to where he feels too vulnerable. And you'll see what he does, right? And how he lets Shiloh know that, whew, I think that was too much. Yep. In the first one you saw, it was Shiloh saying, that's too much with that big stick. And in this one, you're going to see Rayleigh say, this is a bit too much. I don't feel quite safe in this situation. So 2 different videos about intimacy there. Yeah. So at this point, I'll just open it up to any questions, any other sharing, any reflections, anything you want to share? You guys feeling good? We also don't have to go the full hour and 30 minutes. I'm respectful of time too. I know everybody has lots of things to do. But are you still finding the content helpful? Still glad you're engaged in the course? Yes, a lot of nods. Okay. Yeah, I'm really glad you are too. And I'm so thankful that all of you took the plunge to do this live support, because I think having the conversations is so helpful. I mean, the content's useful on its own, but not only being able to reflect out loud, but to hear each other and know how much it means to realize we're not alone out there. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, ladies. I'll get this recording up, and I know Shannon will enjoy watching it. So thank you. Do you have any more comments for Shannon since she's not here? No? Good.
Thanks for being so brave and sharing.
Yeah. And Colleen never got in today. So I'm sure she's working on it. She's been active on it. But Colleen, if you have any story that you want to share and you don't want to wait till next week, feel free to share it in the Facebook page too. We want to know how your week has been. All right. I'll go for now, ladies. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.